Welcome to The World Today. I'm Majeed Khan. Today's topic is counter-terrorism, especially in Pakistan's perspective, how Pakistan's war on terror is progressing, what Pakistan can do for the return of regional peace. That's what we'll be talking about in our program today. Let me introduce my guests in the studio. Joining me for this discussion today, we have AVM Ikram BHatti with us. He's a defense analyst. And with him, we have Khurram Iqbal. He's with the NDU and also a counter-terrorism expert. Thank you very much, sir, for being here. Sir, let's begin the discussion. First of all, a very welcome step has been taken by the Cabinet. New rules to tighten the noose around banned outfits have been made. So the Federal Cabinet on Tuesday approved new rules to tighten the noose around these banned outfits in the country and block their financial assistances. Do you think that is enough, sir, under the current situation that we are facing, or do you think more needs to be done?
You see, as long as we have an impression across the world that terrorist activity continues to emanate out of Pakistan, the terrorist organizations have a relatively free hand in Pakistan, we'll need to continue to undertake such steps. And the viewers would know that yesterday's approval by the Senate essentially is coming just before Pakistan is going to be debated for putting on the watch list for terror financing.
Right, sir.
And had it been done much earlier, then it would not be required to undertake this in a haste, just days before that meeting.
Right.
So that means we need to give it a serious thought, although State Bank says that they have closed around 4,500 accounts of individuals and organizations that are suspected of indulging into terror financing through Hawala, through Hundi. And that is something which should have been going on over the years while we undertake Operation Zarbaz or Radd al-Fasad. I mean, the same type of operation should be undertaken by the State Bank. The same type of operation should be taken by other institutions whereby we can choke all these organizations. But if the state of Pakistan feels that these are not terrorist organizations and that they need to continue to work and they need to be allowed to continue to work, then we should be able to convince the world. If we have not been able to convince the world, then maybe there is something that we do not know and the world knows.
Well, there are some organizations, sir, that have been prescribed by the United Nations Security Council, and those organizations operating in Pakistan have been earmarked specifically. And then the government has taken concrete action in shutting down their offices, or rather taking them over themselves. That is the more correct version. Khurram, in your opinion, do you think that is it a case of too little, too late, or do you think that it's the right step in the right direction, better late than never?
We must understand that Pakistan is fighting a war against terrorism on multiple fronts. We have fought a decisive battle against terrorism on the Western Front and successfully eliminated some of the most formidable terrorist organizations who were either relocated or pushed to the tribal areas of Pakistan, including Al-Qaeda and Daesh. The second front of our war against terrorism is basically in the mainland Pakistan, where organizations such as Jamaat-ud-Dawa, Jaish-e-Mohammed, they continue to operate in the past. But even in the past, the government of Pakistan and its affiliate institutions have taken concrete steps to eliminate their activities, their financial stream. It is just a matter of priorities, because we should not forget that 85% of terrorist attacks in Pakistan were mounted by the terrorist organizations who were holed up in FATA. These organizations, including Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed, they largely stayed away from domestic terrorism. That's why the state authorities, they decided that we'll take on them, but in a later stage. So that was always on the agenda, to take on these organizations which have been Kashmir specific in the past. This is continuity of those steps which the government of Pakistan has taken. For example, a few months ago there was a proposal that the government of Pakistan must take over all the charity fronts and assets related to Jamaat-ud-Dawa Falah-e-Insaniyat Foundation. So now, since the international pressure is also increasing on Pakistan, so I think we have taken the right step into right direction. This is very important to choke their finances, but in doing so, we must ensure that we should not discourage them from those who wish to be a part of the political mainstream. And here I'm referring to the transformation of some of the key leaders of Jamaat-ud-Dawa into Milli Muslim League. There have been an initiative by some of the leaders of Jamaat-ud-Dawa who have shunned violence and decided to be a part of political mainstream. That is something we must cultivate in the larger interest, because if we discourage such elements, we may be setting wrong precedents. So these are two different issues. On one side, you have to basically tackle those who are not willing to renounce violence, and then there's an issue of those who are willing to renounce violence and become a part of political mainstream. So that's where we have to walk very carefully.
Absolutely, that is a very fine line, as you have mentioned yourself. Let's also talk about this putting Pakistan on the watch list for terror financing, as AVM Saab has also mentioned, sir. This happened in the backdrop of the Chief of Army Staff's visit to Afghanistan, sir. The Chief of Army Staff was in Afghanistan yesterday. He was talking about Pakistan's role in the war on terror. Also the fact that there are no terrorist sanctuaries in Pakistan as a result of the operations that were conducted by the military. Despite that, we've had accusations coming from left and right, sir. So having said that, we also have some moves taking place in the United Nations where they want to further give us some military aid and economic aid, as first they had stopped the military aid. So a lot of confusion within the US also we are seeing, sir. What's your take on this, sir? What's your opinion? Why is there confusion even in the West?
See, in the next year's budget, they have allocated around $350 million for assistance to Pakistan under different heads, both military, security, economic aid as well. Now, this is an encouraging development that despite all the acquisitions, the Americans do feel that they continue to remain engaged with Pakistan, and they continue to provide assistance to Pakistan for all the efforts that Pakistan is undertaking in this war against terror in this region. But at the same time, we know that their accusations continue unabated. And there, I think we will, while the Americans have been telling us to do more, I think we need to do more specifically over here in our ability to convince the Americans and the Afghanis that
we have done much more than what they're asking for.
Yes, and that we specifically need to do more in this area, that we should be able to convince them that there are no safe havens. And if we have not been able to convince them and they have not agreed or accepted, that means there is still some room for us to work on and convince them. There could be joint operations, there could be intelligence sharing, because our security forces are well equipped, well trained and experienced to undertake such like operations. As long as we have an actionable intelligence from Afghanis or the Americans, Pakistani security forces can undertake those operations and convince them that, look, there are no safe havens. In case you did report and it was an actionable intelligence, appropriate action has been undertaken, and whosoever was there or whatever elements were there, they have been taken care of or eliminated. So this is something that I think we need to work on in order to convince both the Americans and the Afghanis that there are no safe havens here.
It's not just the Americans and the Afghans, sir. It's also the European Union. There's France and Germany that have also backed that proposal to put Pakistan on the watch list.
If the Americans are agreeing, if they agree and they get convinced.
But this is a perception, sir. The perception that exists in the European capitals as well, that maybe there is some truth in that accusation. But let's talk about what the Chief of Army Staff himself has admitted or said in Afghanistan. He said that although Pakistan has eliminated all terrorist sanctuaries from its soil, However, residual signatures of terrorists who take advantage of the presence of Afghan refugees and lack of effective border security coordination are also being traced through the ongoing Operation Raddul Fasad. Khurram, if you would like to elaborate on this particular aspect.
Well, that's pretty much true, and the West must understand this particular point, that the safe havens or the imaginary safe havens of militants inside Pakistan are not mainly due to that state of Pakistan is complacent, but mainly because of the porous border that exists between Pakistan and Afghanistan.
Also the large number of
and the large
refugees.
number of refugees. In the past, since 2001, when Americans intervened in Afghanistan, Pakistan has proposed time and again to manage this border between the two countries, but each time our proposals have been rejected by the Americans and by the Afghan side.
Why does that not make sense? Because it completely confuses the people in Pakistan and elsewhere. When Pakistan speaks about effective border control, border management, why do we not have cooperation from the Americans and the Afghans on this fact?
And that also basically creates distrust and mistrust about American intentions in the region. And the question is raised, if Americans are actually serious and concerned about terrorists' supposed safe havens inside Pakistan, then why are they opposing Pakistan's idea of managing the border? When we proposed this to Hamid Karzai, he invoked the so-called disputed nature of the border between the two countries. That was never an issue, but Afghans have again basically brought this issue into discourse.
A non-issue.
Non-issue. And when Pakistan forces basically devote all their finances and manpower to manage the border, our forces have been fired upon by the Afghan forces. Number of soldiers have embraced martyrdom while in their efforts to protect the border. Such acts by the Afghan forces have never been condemned by United States of America, which means that there is a tacit approval from the Americans of such acts from the Afghan forces. So that's a critical issue where Americans basically have to take it into consideration, that without effective management of Pak-Afghan border, you cannot control the cross-border movement of militants, whether they belong to TTP, Jamaatul Ahrar, or Afghan Taliban or Daesh.
Right, and let's also talk about what the Chief of Army Staff said further, and that's really more important. The Chief of Army Staff has said that Pakistan does not allow its territory to be used against any other country, but we also expect that sentiment and that action is reciprocated, and that's the very crux of the matter. He expects the same in reciprocity. A collaborative approach and persistence is the answer to the challenges, is what the Chief of Army Staff said, sir. Now, having said that, when do you think we'll be able to see some kind of reciprocity when it comes to dealing with the cross-border militant issue?
See, you would recall about 2 months ago, Pakistani forces did engage some terrorist locations across the border without moving into Afghanistan, and we got a comment from the local US commander that Pakistan should share information and we'll take care of the presence of any terrorists in Afghan territory close to Pakistani border, which does indicate that they accepted this activity from Pakistan and that they acknowledge that whosoever or whatever elements Pakistani military forces did engage across the border, they were bona fide targets. So it means that Pakistan will have to look for those locations in Afghanistan through its own intelligence sources, but the fact remains that the Americans are situated or located over there for the last 17, 18 years, and they have all the assets and resources in order to eavesdrop, to surveil, to search and carry out reconnaissance and locate and identify the location of the terrorists. And asking Pakistan to identify the locations is, I think, unfair. They should be able to locate those terrorists themselves and engage them. But I'm sure our intelligence network does have that information as well, and basically it is going to be intelligence sharing. And in case they think that we have some safe haven, they should share that intelligence with us. And in case we think that certain such action has been undertaken by people from Afghanistan, we should be able to share a very convincing, actionable intelligence to them. And if they do not react, then of course that's food for thought for us, and that, as you said, shows their intention, or of course it adds to the mistrust or the distrust that we already have. So I think intelligence sharing is the answer, and as we covered a little while ago that the army chief had said, and he had actually alluded to the fencing of the border and the return of the Afghan refugees, which has been our long standing demand from the Afghans and the Americans. If you recall, it was in 2005 that Pakistan first asked for the fencing of the border, and ever since then, while it is understandable if the Afghans oppose it, because historically they have been claiming the dispute over the Durand line, but what's with the Americans? They have no issue with the Durand line, and somehow they have also not accepted this. I mean, in fact, they should
Maybe they just want to appease the Afghans, sir.
Obviously, because that is one of the moves that will of course appease the Afghans and of course make the Americans more acceptable while they're there. And secondly,
But it would be detrimental to the American war on terror, wouldn't it?
but you see, then that brings us to the very big question that what are the intentions of the Americans while they are in Afghanistan?
Well, let's hope they don't have any pretensions about their intentions, sir. But Khurram, let's talk about the mechanism to ensure that the functioning of JUD and such organizations is controlled by the government, and madrasas or humanitarian organizations that are working for the benefit of the people in our society. They are also now under observation by the government. Some of them have been taken over by the government to continue their activities under watchful eye. Is that the right approach? Do you think that is going to yield any results, or will that actually damage the functioning of the organizations themselves?
There are two aspects to your question. One is JUD and second is the madrasa education system. With regards to Jamaat-ud-Dawa, that has never been an American concern during last 15 years, because mainly it has never been involved in any act of terrorism in the West. But because JUD and its splinter organizations have conducted some cross-border attacks inside India, so on Indian, perhaps to appease them, Americans have been coming very hard against Jamaat-ud-Dawa, and they consider it as a threat. And there have been efforts by the American and Western policymakers and scholars of counterterrorism to link JUD with groups like Al-Qaeda and Daesh. Whether JUD is actually linked to these groups, this is a separate debate. But there is one important point that we should remember, that during last 15 or 16 years, the government of Pakistan has basically adopted number of steps to transform Jamaat-ud-Dawa, to control its activities. And we should also devote some efforts to convince the Western capitals that there is more to counterterrorism than kinetic and coercive means to basically handle a terrorist organization. You can never eliminate a terrorist organizations by merely relying on the use of force. Wherever it is needed, Pakistan is doing that. But when it comes to Jamaat-ud-Dawa, we have put Hafiz Muhammad Saeed on a number of occasions under house arrest. He gets a clean sheet from the court, and we have to basically listen what the court of law is saying. But during last 1 year, JUD has made a conscious effort to transform itself into first a charity organization and then into a political organization. Now the West and India is quite critical of this approach. They think that it is happening with the tacit approval of Pakistani establishment, and they do not want to give any chance to Jamaat-ud-Dawa to become a part of political mainstream. I think they are being hypocrite and they're following double standards here. When it comes to Gulbuddin Hikmatyar's Hizb-e-Islami in Afghanistan, America has no problem with transforming a militant organization which is led by someone who they refer to as Butcher of Kabul just few months ago. Absolutely. So Americans have no problem transforming and co-opting Hizb-e-Islami. India has no problem co-opting number of Sikh separatist organizations. Britain has no problem.
RSS itself.
RSS has been declared terrorist organizations twice in India. Today, they are ruling India.
Absolutely.
And that's the double standard. Same goes for Britain. They have basically co-opted Irish Republican Army, and that is basically paying the fruits for them as they have become non-violent. So if Britain can co-opt IRA, if Americans can co-opt Gulbuddin Hikmatyar, if India can co-opt RSS, why can't Pakistan co-opt Jamaat-ud-Dawa and make it a part of political mainstream? If they think that Jamaat-ud-Dawa can radicalize the constituency here, let the people of Pakistan decide that. Have we ever voted for religious political organizations? No. They have street power, but they have never been able to get electoral power. So we should basically give this out-of-box solutions a chance. Relying merely on kinetic means will never eliminate the threat of extremism.
I think very well put, Khurram. I couldn't have said it better myself. Let's also talk about some of the statements that have been made by Hassan Iqbal in a recent interview to CNN. Sir, he said that any effort to bully Pakistan will be counterproductive. How do you view this particular message that Hassan Iqbal gave to the US specifically?
You see, there have been statements earlier on by the American military men basically that there could be a possibility of unilateral military action by America.
But they've also said that there is no chance of that happening, by the way.
Yes, later on, of course, when they got a very strong reply from Pakistan, they did go back and said something different. But you'd recall that there have been discussion on this, for example, on the drone strikes, that we need to debate their legality and the losses of life and property that they have caused in Pakistan since 2002. Because
and wouldn't it be pertinent to mention here, sir, that the last drone strike that the Americans conducted was on an Afghan refugee camp?
Yes, and they insist that it was a hideout of the terrorists, but it happens to be a refugee camp, and it is in Pakistan. We know what it is, unless they can come and say that, okay, this is not a refugee camp. So this is something that the Americans will now have to face, because even in American media, in their literature, in their reports, we know that around only 10% of the deaths caused by drone strikes were those of terrorists, and 90% of the people killed were innocent civilians, and the loss of property is way beyond this. So when the Americans hear this, that okay, our Senate is debating this, that we need to question the Americans and ask them to pay for these losses that they have caused, and they have to answer for the civilians that they have killed. I mean, it cannot be just a rampant, unabated, unchecked campaign of attacks where they kill innocent civilians and they can get away with it.
Well, they are getting away with it, sir. Let's also talk about the incident that occurred today in Quetta, sir. 4 FC soldiers were martyred in an attack in Quetta just yesterday, or was it today? And we are witnessing constant terrorism and terrorist attacks on Pakistani personnel day in, day out. So why is it that they don't understand when Pakistan speaks about peace in Afghanistan? They think that Pakistan seems to be the problem and not the other way around. Khurram, would you like to answer that?
If you look at the terrorist incidents in 2017, although there have been considerable decline, which is almost 16% decline in the number of terrorist attacks, but those reports also indicate a significant increase in number of attacks in Balochistan. What has happened in Quetta is not new. I think there's a new wave of terrorism in Balochistan, and we must basically find out the reasons why Balochistan has been struck so hard by terrorism during 2017 and why this trend continues in 2018. There are a number of reasons for that. Number one, that Daesh has tried to cultivate itself in Balochistan. Number two, Balochistan shares a long and porous border with Afghanistan. We have only fenced and dedicated all of efforts to manage the border between FATA and Afghanistan, but the Balochistan part is still not addressed. And three, there is a strong network of spies which was created by Kulbhushan Yadav. Although after his arrest, dozens of his operatives have been arrested by Pakistani law enforcement agencies, but there are quite a few who are still at large, most probably in Balochistan. Why? Because Balochistan is the most important node of China-Pakistan economic corridor, and Yadav in his confessional statements have acknowledged that research and analysis wing of India has established specialized cells to jeopardize the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. So I think now our collective efforts to fight terrorism must focus Balochistan as the center of gravity, because it's very important to secure Balochistan. If we fail to do so, I think the entire security of China-Pakistan Economic Corridor will be under question.
Add number 4 element over here,
Sir.
because and that is the highest concentration of Afghan refugees in Quetta. 30% of the population of Quetta city is composed of Afghan refugees, and it's very easy for any terrorist to come in and blend and hide and find support from that group. So, which goes on to say that we need to continue to emphasize
Step up
on
our
this.
vigilance, sir.
Yes, not only vigilance, but we need to step up our efforts to ensure and bring about the repatriation of the refugees.
Absolutely, sir. Let's also talk about Ayaz Sadiq, sir, the Speaker of the National Assembly. He attended a coordination meet in Afghanistan to fight terror, and says that Pakistan would like to have good relations with the US as well as with our neighbors based on respect and equality, sir. Khurram, if you'd like to elaborate on this particular statement of Ayaz Sadiq, he's there right now. Why is it that all of Pakistan's cooperation is usually brushed under the carpet, and again the carrot and stick approach is mostly what we see, and it doesn't seem to be working, is it?
But the good omen is that the frequency of high-profile visits from Pakistan to Afghanistan has increased considerably during last 1 year or so. I think this is the second visit of Ayaz Sadiq, and he has also invited Afghan parliamentarians to Islamabad a few months ago. Then Pakistan's Chief of Army Staff, General Bajwa, has visited Afghanistan twice during last 1 year. So these are the positive omens for the bilateral relations, and this also indicates Pakistan's sincere efforts to stabilize Afghanistan. Why there is no reciprocity? I think there are two main reasons. Number one, Afghanistan's heavy reliance on United States of America, and secondly, there are some elements within Kabul government which whose existence is basically, it depends on the instability and chaos. If there's no conflict, they will find it hard to justify their presence there. Ashraf Ghani is on record saying that if Americans pull out, will not survive for more than 6 months. So you have spent more than $1 trillion in Afghanistan during the last 16 years. There are no institutions yet. So it basically questions the American efforts. What have they done? Have they wasted their time in Afghanistan? So these, and the issue of reciprocity also is related to some genuine weaknesses of the Kabul government. Even if they intend to reciprocate to Pakistan's gestures of goodwill, I think they can't, because the administration in Kabul is not centralized. It's divided into two main fronts, and when you go out of Kabul, there are different centers of power. So even if there's an intention on the Afghan side to reciprocate to Pakistan's gesture,
they don't have the ability. Unfortunate. Let's also talk about what's been happening in the West. We have this statement by the US intelligence chief, Mr. Dan Coates, who says that Pakistan is still going easy on militants. That's what the intelligence chief said. Then the US allies, as you also mentioned earlier in the program, sir, are pushing to place Pakistan on the terror financing watch list. And in the backdrop of all this happening, at the same time, the US, or rather saying that military aid to Pakistan will help defeat IS and Al-Qaeda. That's being stated by the Trump administration, no less, sir. The Trump administration has asked Congress to approve $336 million of civil and military aid to Pakistan after shutting down their military aid to Pakistan earlier. So that's like taking out a good $10 million of what they were giving us previously. Now, if you look at all these three stories that appeared in the press today, sir, what do you make of it? It's very confusing.
See, one thing is very clear, that the Americans fully understand their dependence on Pakistan for the continuation of their stay in Afghanistan. They are now again planning to increase the number of troops, which after the initial increase of 3,000 by another maybe 3,000 to 4,000. There are reports that setting up a new camp or a base within Afghanistan, and for which of course they'll need to ship a lot of hardware and infrastructure through Pakistan, and again for that they need Pakistan to cooperate. And of course Pakistan has taken a very strong view of these statements that have come out from 21st of August onwards until today. So they do realize that if they continue to push Pakistan against the wall, there is every likelihood that as after Salalah they discontinued all support, the same can happen. And if that be the case, then their activities in Afghanistan would slow down or come to a grinding halt. Hence, they need to push Pakistan only as much and not beyond. That is why they now have put a certain amount of finances in the next budget. And of course, while there is a statement of accusing Pakistan, there is another statement, okay, we will not take any unilateral action. So, of course, as mentioned by my colleague, there has been interaction, dialogue, visits between Pakistan and Afghanistan in the last couple of months at a very high pitch compared to what has been happening in the earlier years. 2 Afghan delegations have visited Pakistan in quick succession. Pakistan diplomats have been visiting in Kabul. So this, I think, this interaction, this dialogue, this engagement, I think is very positive, and it is certainly going to convince the or of course make the Afghans understand about the intentions of Pakistan. But as we just debated a little while ago, that there is the American pressure, there is the American support, and there is the Indian interest, and which actually deters or withholds Afghan cooperation or understanding towards Pakistan. Plus, they have their own interests, because Afghanistan is now in a war economy, and if the peace returns to Afghanistan, there is tranquility, there is stability, then a lot of people will be out of their jobs, even in the government.
But not more than the people of Afghanistan, sir. The ordinary citizens of Afghanistan are not all involved in the war economy, sir.
But the fact remains that the people who are calling the shots, are the ones who are going to lose their job.
Yes, sir.
So in order to remain in their same chair and the same office, they need Afghanistan to remain in a state of turmoil, unrest, and terrorism continues. That is their continuity, unfortunately. And as I'll come back to the same question again as to what is the intention of America in Afghanistan.
So that is the million-dollar question, and unfortunately nobody can really answer that except give our own cynical views about that. Well, Khurram, in your opinion, what do you think is the reason behind this carrot and stick approach? Again, from what we read out of the press stories that are appearing every day in the news, this is again the same policy that has been tried and tested earlier but has failed. Again, carrot and stick. On the one hand, they're trying to press Pakistan by putting them on the terror financing watch list. Now, on the other hand, they're sometimes withholding their aid, and then they're requesting for aid to be given because it serves their purpose. So where are we really headed?
I think this marriage of convenience between the United States and Pakistan is getting uglier day by day. And it's mainly because of the transformation and shift in America's global strategic ambitions. There was a time when America's global strategic goal was to eliminate, supposedly, global terrorism to protect its homeland and its allies from the threat of Islamist extremism. But American Defense Minister, Defense Secretary Jim Mattis, last month announced that we are no more focusing our energies on eliminating terrorism. Rather, we'll focus all our efforts to contain and counter revisionist Russia and China. I think that's the lens which the American administration is likely to use to understand and to deal with South Asia. They know to contain a revisionist Russia or China, India will come very handy. That's why they are going out of basically their intention to appease India. But when it comes to Pakistan, they know it very well. Pakistan will never be a part of any design to contain Russia and China, because we see the rise of Russia and China as an opportunity for countries like Pakistan. So I think that's the strategic divergence between United States and Pakistan. So what we can do is as we diverge on strategic aspect, we can only basically engage at the tactical level. And what are those tactical levels, as suggested by my co-panelist, that there are American forces inside Afghanistan. For their existence and survival, America is dependent on Pakistan for its land route. So these are few tactical points where we can engage with United States of America, but I think the space for convergence is shrinking day by day.
So let's come back to things that are more pertinent at home, and that's the government's move of taking over the seminary and dispensaries of the Jamaat-ud-Dawa in Rawalpindi. But there are offices of such organizations that are spread all across the country, sir. Do you think that this particular move is going to be enough? How will the government be able to deal with the network that is spread across the country when dealing with the humanitarian organizations of such outfits?
You see, such like NGOs are globally present. In every country, you have certain NGOs which augment government's capacity to deal with humanitarian issues. But in Pakistan, we find that it is just not charitable or humanitarian organizations, but even our scope of the effort that government of Pakistan is incurring in educating the population. Our education system is very weak. That is why we have seen these mushrooming madrasas. Earlier on, of course, they were created to churn out jihadis, but now we know that it is just not, according to reports, about 10 to 15% of the madrasas which are found to be having militant literature or militant syllabus and producing such like people. And the rest were honest to goodness in improving the literacy rate and imparting education to young children. Because these madrasas not only provided education, but of course boarding and lodging as well. So poor people would be very happy in sending their children. So the government, besides taking over these seminaries, need to spend a lot more money, lot more fund, lot more budget on developing and improving our schooling system, so that the poor people of Pakistan can send their children to these schools, government schools, and not to these seminaries. Similarly, we need to improve our own disaster management network, and whereas these charitable organizations or NGOs will have little reducing role in the society. And in the absence of that, of course, there will be a space for these people, and of course, their charitable work will be better managed than the government, and of course, they will be able to win the hearts and minds of the people. And whenever they want to indulge in any other activity other than charitable work, then of course there will be sympathizers and supporters from the people. And that is what these people, that is the kind of support that the people enjoyed maybe 5 years ago. And because the mindset of the people at that time was, the narrative was that these are the people who are serving the cause of Islam. So there was, across the country, there were people who were collecting money for them and they were supporting them. But it was only after the APS that people realized that, look, these people are honest to goodness terrorists and they are not fighting the cause of Islam. So I think developing a narrative, improving our education system, improving our disaster management or relief network is going to be worked upon alongside while the government takes over these seminaries, because that alone is not going to work. I mean, that is just like a band-aid. We will have to undertake a systematic program, a systematic campaign where we improve our education system, improve our relief network, and that is what is going to keep our people safe from these seminaries and these NGOs. Otherwise, this problem is going to maybe reduce a little while in the beginning and then re-emerge.
Right. Khurram, if we recall, Pakistan was earlier also put on this terror financing watch list. I can't remember the exact year, but it was done before previously.
2012
to 2015.
Right.
Yes.
So then what steps did Pakistan take in order to get off that list? Because now they're reconsidering putting us back on that list. Miftah Ismail is of the opinion that that might not happen because Pakistan has taken the steps that are required for us to not get back on that list. And it is going to damage Pakistan in more ways than one, especially economically, if we are on that list.
Back then, what the government of Pakistan did was to basically ban the charity fronts affiliated with organizations such as Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed. But as the time passed by, these charity fronts re-emerged with different names, and that's what is being monitored internationally. So there were some legal and administrative problems which prevented Pakistan's moves against these front organizations. But now with this bill which has been passed today, I think it will be much easier administratively and legally to move against those fronts who are linked to the militant outfits focusing on Kashmir or beyond the border of Pakistan.
Well, thank you very much, gentlemen, for taking out the time and sharing your views with PTV World. Well, that's all the time we have for our program today, but I hope you learned something useful from our discussions. And in the end, we always say you may draw your own conclusions from what you've heard. And we hope and pray that peace returns to our region sooner rather than later. On that note, it's goodbye.